Aside from that, though, it's a really, really great time to be diving into it. It's a great marketing activity to give some normalcy to, you, dear listener, in the audience. This is a consistent thing you could do, saying, hey, for the next 2 months, I want to get on, say, 3 podcasts as a guest each month. And so it gives you something to aim towards. It gives you something to work towards. It adds something new into your marketing stack to replace something that might be gone, like attending conferences or events in person or organizing a meetup or another type of event. So it both switches in really nicely for what you were doing in the past, gives you some normalcy, and helps you reach new people out there in the wild and educate them about how you could help them.
Hey everybody, I'm Ken Newhouse, and I'm going to welcome you to the Get Clients Now podcast, the show where high-growth consultants and professionals come to access the newest and most effective methods and systems for online marketing, advanced sales and persuasive communication strategies, and automated marketing funnels. And if you're wondering if the Get Clients Now podcast can help you get more high-value clients, enjoy more sales, build a massive tribe, and make more money, you're absolutely going to love this show.
Newhouse's work completely blows everything else that we've ever done with Google out of the water.
I have been looking for a way to grow my presence online, and what I've viewed from Newhouse's work was something that certainly is faster than anything I've seen before.
He says he's going to do something and he does it. He does it in the time frame that he says he's going to do it in. It's exciting when you talk about the results that you're going to get, and you can believe his word because he follows it up with action.
The Newhouse is direct, he's to the point, he tells you what's on his mind, and he backs his words up. From what I know now, from working with him, he's passionate about his work, and he backs it up 100%.
What I like best is you offer something that no one else has out there, which is a pretty comprehensive approach about marketing a system.
If somebody asks me, should they use Newhouse's team? Absolutely, because you're going to get the important information that you need very, very quickly.
On the internet, on the different marketing techniques, I've never experienced anything like this.
I would definitely recommend Ken Newhouse for someone who's serious about growing their business. I think that your results based on the numbers would at least double the sales in a very short time frame.
Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here from KenNewhouse.com, and I'm going to welcome you back to the Get Clients Now podcast, where the one-size-fits-all marketing model is dumb, the client-centric business model is king, and leading experts share strategies and methods that you can use to accelerate brand acceptance, skyrocket your significance in the marketplace, and elevate your status, allowing you to build your tribe with certainty. Today is episode number 352 of the Get Clients Now podcast, and today our guest is Kai Davis. And Kai Davis is an individual that teaches independent consultants and freelancers how to get more leads for their business by implementing marketing habits that will help you fill your pipeline with high-quality, qualified leads. Now, as you know, I've had several top-rated podcast booking professionals on the show over the last few weeks, where we've been actually looking at how getting booked on top-rated podcasts and getting your message out into the marketplace can generate leads, increase conversions, and get more clients coming into your business. We've also been looking at the various frameworks that our guest experts use with their clients, specifically to get their clients booked on top-rated podcasts, top-rated shows. And on today's episode, Kai's going to be reviewing the 5-step process he uses to get clients and members booked and scheduled on top-rated podcasts around the globe, which admittedly, in my opinion, and certainly this is not taking anything away from the guests we've already had on the show, but in my opinion, this is certainly a more sophisticated process you can use to generate spectacular, over-the-top results. And so if you'd like to become more persuasive and influential in the niche you serve, and if you'd like to become more credible and authoritative in the eyes of your perfect prospects and clients, getting booked on podcasts and getting your message out into the marketplace to tens of thousands, to hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of highly qualified prospects, and learning how to get yourself booked on lots of different podcasts on the right podcasts is something that you certainly want to consider, something you probably want to learn how to do. Now, if you're a member of the Get Clients Now Nation, or if you're a recent subscriber to the show, you know that I normally do an opening monologue, and in that monologue, I'll read and review one of the questions you've sent over the past couple of weeks. And as it relates to those individual questions, I actually try to choose a single question that best represents the training I'm going to be doing on that particular episode, maybe the series we're doing, and that represents the biggest challenges you're facing as it relates to the particular topic we're doing on the show or in the series. Well, unfortunately, on today's episode, I'm not going to be able to do my opening monologue. And in fact, I'm not going to be able to do it because I'm not feeling very good today. I'm definitely under the weather. And that's interesting, not because I'm under the weather. It's interesting because after 352 episodes, 361 if you count the shows we actually haven't published yet, but in 352 episodes, I've never missed an episode. Every week we've been on the air. I've never not published an episode, and I've never not been able to do an opening monologue. So please forgive me for not getting to your questions on today's show, and hopefully, I'm pretty sure I'm usually a very, very healthy guy. In fact, I don't really remember the last time I was sick. Actually, I was sick, 6 or 8 months ago. I think it was when I interviewed Paul Smith, if I remember correctly now. We were talking about story selling. Paul wrote a really good book, so look up Paul Smith. It's just an absolutely great book, but that's the one time I can remember in the 2 years I've been doing this show that I actually got sick. Still did the show, didn't miss, still did the opening monologue, but that's the one time I can remember in the last, 4 or 5 years where I actually felt sick, where I was actually sick. I just didn't feel sick, I was sick. So anyway, hopefully on the next episode, I'll be back to 100%. And that next show, we're going to be interviewing Gleb Sapersky, PhD. And Gleb's the author of the book, Never Go With Your Gut. It's a phenomenal book. It's got great ratings on Amazon. He sold tons and tons of books. And so that's going to wrap up my opening monologue for today. And if you guys are ready, I'm going to go ahead and welcome Kai Davidson on the show. Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here with you, and I got our special guest today on this episode of the Get Clients Now podcast. We've got Kai Davis. Kai, it's great to have you. So on behalf of myself and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I really appreciate you being here. Went through your bio. You've got an outstanding bio. And again, the topic of our show today is going to be talking about podcast guesting and why that's such a big deal, why it's such a hot topic today. I still think it's vastly underutilized by a lot of people. They're still spinning their wheels, trying to, invest in pay-per-click, maybe Facebook ads, whatever it is, content marketing, when right under their nose is the amazing potential to just transform their business, their bottom line, and their sales, even in light of the coronavirus we're dealing with right now. And we'll dive into that in just a second. But what I'd like to do first, if I could, is this is a question, and I kind of reviewed these with you earlier. These are first 2 questions that I ask every guest, and I ask them so we can get a better feel for our guests. Sometimes a listener, a member of the Get Clients Now Nation may not know who a particular guest is, so this gives them a little, like a reference point, a place where they can start. And that way they get much better value out of the show. So if you could take 2 to 3 minutes, if you could, give us your backstory. I know you're one of the, like I said in the introduction, you're very well known, one of the leaders in the industry for helping people get on podcast shows. And you're not just a podcast booking agency. There's a lot more to it. And I've had a string of very, very important people, very, very, I would say, successful top of the industry people on as guests on this particular topic. But you're coming at this from an entirely different angle, which I think is one that's overlooked by most of the people that I've talked to so far. So if you could, give us your backstory and let us know what we need to know for the show today.
Absolutely. From a young age, I've just been enamored with marketing. I can remember when I was 13 or 14, just starting to uncover topics like what exactly is email marketing? What is, search engine optimization? And as I moved forward, from being a teen into college, I gravitated towards marketing related classes, entrepreneurship related classes, and I've always been doing something on the side to practice my marketing chops. My first business back when I was 14 or 15 was selling Magic the Gathering cards on eBay. And that was both a bunch of fun and gave me a bunch of experience in terms of selling online. How do we reach people? How do we make this captivating or relevant to them? After I graduated college, I moved into the workforce as a marketing director at a couple companies. It was a good experience and really showed me that I prefer more the hustle around entrepreneurship. The office life just was not for me. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I've really been focused on email marketing even more so. As I understand more of what makes up sort of the full funnel for any online business, again and again, I'm just seeing the value of email marketing. When it comes to, say, appearing on a podcast, I've always been a fan of, hey, let's get on a relevant show. Let's present a call to action so people realize, oh, there's a spot I could go sign up to hear more from this person or learn more. And once you have them on the email list, it becomes so much easier to nurture that relationship. So in a way, while we're talking about podcast outreach and podcast tours within this episode, it's really the full funnel that interests me. I've just love learning more about how it all flows together and connects together and how we could help a client or help a colleague amplify their marketing, reach more relevant people, and preserve those relationships over time.
Yeah, that's when I talked about going deeper. Those are some of the things that we definitely want to touch on. As an example, if you are a business owner or a professional and you want to become the featured expert on a podcast, most of the companies, and again, these are leading companies, people that are the owners of the companies that I've had on the show, They've got a thing where they teach you about using a one sheet, things like that. And they do all that heavy lifting for you, whereas you're the individual who can actually train people and teach them. You've got courses and one-on-one coaching where you can actually show them how to do it themselves. Because a lot of people, me included, I'm a do-it-myself guy most of the time, especially when it comes to marketing. Now, most of the other stuff I delegate, but when it comes to my marketing and things like that, that's something I'm not willing to delegate, which is, it's one of the smartest things you can do is don't delegate your marketing. Keep that as close to the vest as possible. If you need help with professional copywriting or things like that, that's why you hire people like Kai and myself. But having said that, we're going to dive into that certainly a lot deeper here in just a second. But let me ask you this. This is the second question that I ask everyone. Has there been a mentor or an individual, a time, a book, and situation that occurred in your life where you were like, you know what, this has happened, or this person talked to me, this person encouraged me. I'm definitely going to go in the direction that you are now. Can you think of anything that comes to mind?
Absolutely. There are two books that basically were a big whack on the side of the head and put me onto the current course I am now. One is The Brain Audit by Sean DeSouza. And it's such a fantastic book, helping readers understand, okay, why do people actually buy? Why do they take action? Sean dives into the different 7 bags, the 7 elements. And that really captivated me and just pushed me forward on marketing. The other one, Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. This is my most reread book. If I had it in the room, I'd show it, but it has probably 100 different flag notes in it. Every page is highlighted. One of the most transformational books for me when it comes to marketing and seeing, okay, how do marketing and sales fit into this overall picture? So those two books, strong recommendations from me, and books that I just honestly love.
I've read both the books, and I've read Chet Holmes' book many times, and actually I really liked his work so much. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He died of cancer, but those are both, like I said, those are both excellent books. Unfortunately, like I said, Chet Holmes is no longer with us, but guys, Kai brings up a good point. And, I asked that question, that second question I asked, number one, it gives me a better feel for my guest. But number two, you just did something and proved one of the reasons why I asked the question, because you revealed 2 exceptional books. Now, in this case, I've read them both. Having said that, once in a while, somebody will throw a book out that's really helped them a lot. And it's a great opportunity for me to learn and to go dive into another book. I read 2 books a week religiously. That's not including my Bible, but I've done that for the last 10 years, and it has paid off huge for me. And now I have this, I wouldn't say an addiction, but I need to read. I really just have to read. Started reading a lot of fiction over the last couple of years as well to help me become a better copywriter. So now that we've talked enough about me and why I ask these questions, let's dive into the meat of this, because I know people like myself are chomping in the bit. If you could, you've got some things on your website. Like you said, it's a pretty comprehensive business development business that you're running. Mm-hmm. You're helping high 6, high 7-figure businesses grow their businesses. Most of it's online. Some of it's off, but a lot of the stuff is online. And I picked the topic of podcast guesting because of the series that we ran. Certainly, you've got a much more comprehensive business. But one of the things that I found on your website is you've got a book. It's just a really amazing book. I appreciate the fact that you put it together. It's called Podcast Outreach, and there's actually like a little mini training that people can do in addition to that. So if you could just kind of scratch the surface of that, give us a little bit of a flavor of what that's about. And then as we get into the interview, we'll dive into deeper questions about that and some of the other stuff that you're doing and some suggestions you have for us.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the book Podcast Outreach, I really put it together to give a clear path forward for colleagues, mostly independent business owners or solopreneurs who were saying, hey, how do I get onto these podcasts? Like you referenced, it's nice to keep the marketing we do close to ourselves and keeping it as sort of a core specialization. So putting together Podcast Outreach, one of my primary goals was, okay, let's take the process I identified and I crafted through my experience in outreach and make it a simple, easy, repeatable system so I could just send the PDF to a friend. They could read through it and know, okay, these are the 80% of the things I need to do to get the top results I'm looking for, getting onto relevant podcasts, finding them, sending them a relevant message, knowing when to follow up. It was a joy to put together, and the results, both for myself, my clients, and my customers, have been outstanding. It's helped dozens, if not hundreds of people craft their own podcast tours.
Yeah, I think the fact that if a person invested in your book, now, when we talk about a book, guys, this is the form of a PDF, but most of the time when we talk about buying a book, people will look at a book and say, okay, if it's more than $10, I'm not going to pay for it. Well, that's absolutely the wrong position to take. Your position should be, what value am I going to get from the book? So as an example, I bought a used copy of Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz, which you can't find a brand new copy without paying close to $1,000 for it. Used copy, $700. I've gotten multiples of exponential multiples out of that book. I don't bat an eyelash. And so paying $49 for the book?
$49 for the base, $99 for the complete package with a series of video interviews.
Okay, well, I'm going to chastise you a little bit, and I'm doing this with the utmost professionalism and respect for what you have accomplished and for the reputation that you have. You're undercharging for this information. So guys, when I tell you that this is a value, this would be a value at $500. Because if you can get on one podcast that you're going to hear from Kai in just a few minutes, one podcast, just one. I mean, certainly you want to be on as many as you can. You want to create omnipresence. You want to be as many places as possible when people look for you online. But just one podcast is all it could take to really set things off for you and really transform your business and really get you going in the right direction. But why would a business owner, Kai, that leads me to my next question, why would a business owner, successful business owner, say to themselves, why would I want to be on a podcast? Now, I know the reasons for myself, but why would somebody they don't obviously have a podcast? We're not talking about starting a podcast. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of work. It's doable, but it's a lot of work. But this is the bar for becoming a podcast guest and really killing it with this is really low as compared to starting your own show and doing all that's involved to be found and things like that. Just getting on someone else's show. Why would somebody want to consider being a podcast guest as opposed to doing what they've been doing?
Podcast guesting is one of the most powerful ways to literally get inside of the ears and the head of your target customer. And so one personal anecdote I could share is when I've done more and more podcast guesting, I've had dozens of people reach out to me for my coaching offerings, for my consulting, for just saying, hey, and each time they share something that at the start was like, oh gosh, creepy. And over time just became something that warms my soul. People would say, Kai, it feels like I know you already. I heard you on this podcast, and then I heard you were on another podcast. Then I started to Google around and just find you, found a dozen podcasts you were on. And so basically I'm emailing you to say, please take my money. I don't know yet what I want to spend it on, but I could tell you're a person I want to invest my money with. And so from that, I really take away podcast guesting is a powerful way to build a relationship at scale with people from the privacy and comfort of your own home. I love conference speaking. I love going to events, and those are truly world-class ways to meet people, build relationships. But when we think about the effort it takes to appear on a podcast, have a couple talking points, get in touch with relevant shows, say, hey, I'm a guest. I have, a good audio setup. It's a fraction of what it takes to attend a conference or even speak at a conference. But speaking on a podcast gets you so many of the benefits that we typically see reserved for events or meetups or conferences.
When you talk about, Kai, loving to speak in front of huge audiences at conferences and people hear you say that or people hear me say that, they're thinking to themselves, these guys are sick. They're crazy. I would never do that. I'm terrified to do that. Listen, you and I, there aren't many, there are a few, but I think we're blessed in the fact that for me, I'm not a drug user, but I can imagine, I don't know. I get jazzed. I get juiced up. I get really super motivated and encouraged and enthused speaking in front of large audiences, and whether preferably live. I like live audiences, but podcasting, we talk about being in front of a huge audience or, thousands and thousands of people if you're a podcast guest. Well, that might scare some people, but really it's not. Yes, you're in front of all these people. Not really. You're just talking to somebody on a computer screen like you and I right now. We're on Zoom. Mm-hmm. We're chatting back and forth, and there are thousands of people who are going to listen to this particular episode, but it's just you and I. I know people are listening, but I don't have that same sense of terror or fear that I would have if I was someone who was panicked to speak in front of a group of 10 or 10,000 or whatever. So that's something I would think that, in your experience, helping people don't have an issue. They're not fearful of actually being on there. There's no fear that comes up right when they get in the mic and they freeze up. That you don't see that very often, do you, at all?
No, very, very rarely. Podcasting really is a great way to scale that one-on-one conversation to reach many, many people. For myself, when I first started guesting on podcasts, and similarly for some of my colleagues and friends, it was a bit of a nervous experience. Like, we're going to have a conversation. Will I remember my things? Did I prep right? Will my mic work? But what I found time and time again is after 2 or 3 podcast interviews, you're flying high. You've got 90% of it down, and it feels like a much more comfortable process. So the hesitation or the fear or the resistance that could come up is more from just trying a new thing. But once you get your feet wet, so to speak, it's a lot easier just to move forward with it. And to contrast like the experience of speaking in front of 1,000 people with speaking on a podcast that reaches 1,000 or 10,000, so many more butterflies in the stomach when it's speaking in front of the live audience. With a podcast, it's just so much easier, so much more graceful.
Yeah, it's like you're sitting in Starbucks having a latte with somebody you know or somebody you just met or whatever. It's totally chilled. It's totally laid back. So those are some of the benefits of being on a podcast. What are some of the drawbacks? Is there a downside to being a podcast guest?
That's a really, really good question. Let me think on that for a second.
Let me just, while you're thinking, I'll just chime in on something I thought of. A downside, and this would lead me into another question here in just a few minutes with you, because I know you've done a lot of work to help people with this. A downside of a podcast, being a podcast guest, is coming into an episode, coming into the interview totally unprepared. Not preparing for the interview, and there's a lot that goes into that. That's one of the questions. But in addition to that, is there anything that you can think of where it could be a detriment? I mean, something else I could think of. It turns out the podcast guest you're on, the guy or the gal who's the host turns out to be like an axe murderer or something like that. I mean, those things just don't happen. But I mean, that would be the only other thing I could think of that could be possibly a downside to being a guest on a podcast.
Yeah, those are two really good ones to bring up. The only other one that comes to mind is really we're constrained on time as business owners, as people. And really, like as your business is growing or as you're finding what to do next, there are a lot of hard choices you need to make in terms of, do I want to invest, say, 30 hours over the coming few months mastering this process of appearing on podcasts and validating it works? Or do I want to double it down on something else that already works or use those hours elsewhere in my business or my life? So really, is it the right priority to focus on? Is the only other concern that I would raise with podcast guesting. Other than that, it's really as far as I've seen in the years I've been doing it, a cost or detriment-free system. There aren't a lot of gotchas that pop up. The biggest one I could think of is I went on a show once and it turned out to just be the host inviting me on to pitch me on attending his $2,000 a seat mastermind. And part of me is like, I respect the hustle. And the other part of me is like, you didn't even publish the interview? Why was I on the show?
Yeah, that happened to me with one person as well. And I have to admit, I didn't do my due diligence, but they said, yeah, I've got a podcast. And I'm like, okay, connected me with me on LinkedIn. They said, I'd love to be on your show. And I saw it as an opportunity. This person was a healthcare professional. I saw it as an opportunity to maybe tap into his market because his business was, his business was teaching marketing and helping that particular niche, that group of doctors in that profession with their marketing. And since I typically I've never worked with that industry. I work a lot with dentists. I work a lot with chiropractors, some medical doctors. It's about half my clientele are dentists or chiropractors, but I did the show for him, got him great exposure. And then we did the interview for him. And turns out that his show wasn't even on iTunes and he'd done only 2 shows before. So, that's a gotcha on me. But yeah. So having said that, I want to segue into the next question. We're dealing with coronavirus now. You're on the West Coast. You're actually in Eugene, Oregon. Yes?
Yep.
Not far from where I used to live. A big Oregon Ducks fan, even though I live in Missouri. Should be a Mizzou fan, but I love the color of the uniforms and I love the team. I fell in love with the team when I lived in Portland. But having said that, in the middle of the coronavirus, there are a lot of reasons why being a podcast guest is such a good choice. It's a good thing to pursue. It's a smart business choice. And right now, I think in light of the fact that we're in the midst of this pandemic, I think even right now, like now is probably, or could be in most instances, not everyone, the best time ever to try to get on podcasts. I want to give you a couple of reasons that I think, and then I want to get your response to it. Number one, most people are at home. Not everybody, but right now, another week or 2 month, whatever it is, people are at home. They're tired of watching the news. I know I am. They're burned out. I've talked to a lot of my members. They're just burned out on watching the news because you can only be scared so much. And then you start to get numb to it. And number two, it's an opportunity for you to reach that targeted group of people because either their business has been hurt. So let's say, as an example, you're a marketing guy, right? You got a great reputation within the industry. Everybody knows that you're one of the top marketing guys online. And so you being a podcaster and being on podcast shows, great opportunity for you to reach out and let people know, hey, listen, this is what you might want to do to get your business up and running after this starts to settle down. So you got those people in line. Then you got other people who are like, man, I really need to go to the dentist. I really want to get this done. I've got a cavity. I've got whatever the problem is. I really want to get those veneers. I've been planning my whole life to get these veneers. When can I go back? So if you're a dentist, you go on a show and you talk about, hey, listen, here's what's happening. And probably within this time span will be a good time for you to start coming, calling or making plans to come in to have that done. That's the time frame we're looking at. So in my estimation, and those are two of just many, what do you have any ideas or why right now, or do you even agree with that? Do you think right now is a great time to be a podcast guest pursuing this as a marketing strategy? And if so, what do you think some of the reasons would be, given the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic?
I think it is a good time. Honestly, any time is a good time to add podcast guesting into the mix. It's a strong, durable, evergreen way to get into the ears of your most valuable prospects or customers or audience. One challenge right now is a lot of people are moving towards podcast guesting as they seek some normalcy or seek some marketing activity to do. So I'll often think of podcast guesting as being a bit of a soft game. It's easier to show up and get onto a relevant show than it is to show up at a conference or get onto a radio show. But as more people start to move over and say, hey, I want to appear on podcasts as a guest, it's going to slightly increase the number of outreach emails these hosts are receiving. So it makes it a little more challenging. Not to say it's a terrible time to do it, but one of the constraints right now is more people are going to be pitching. Aside from that, though, it's a really, really great time to be diving into it. It's a great marketing activity to give some normalcy to, you, dear listener, in the audience. This is a consistent thing you could do, saying, hey, for the next 2 months, I want to get on, say, 3 podcasts as a guest each month. And so it gives you something to aim towards. It gives you something to work towards. It adds something new into your marketing stack to replace something that might be gone, like attending conferences or events in person or organizing a meetup or another type of event. So it both switches in really nicely for what you were doing in the past, gives you some normalcy, and helps you reach new people out there in the wild and educate them about how you could help them.
Now, I read on your website, if I'm correct, I'm not sure if it's the book that we talked about, or is it the training program? I'm not sure, the podcast tour, which we'll get to in a few minutes. One of them said that you have like 32 different email templates that come with it. Was that the podcast outreach book?
That's the podcast outreach book.
Okay. And so let's do this. So could a person just cold, I would say pick up the phone, but that's figure of speech. Could they just, write an email and say, hey, listen, I'm an expert, got a great website. I'm a very successful business person. I want to be on your show. That's not going to get a very good response from the particular host or producer of the show. Mm-hmm. And so with respect to that, what I'd like you to do, if you could, obviously there's no possibility we could cover all of it, but if you could just touch some of the key relevant points along the process. So if a person was, say, I'm going to try to get my feet wet first before I dive in with Kai. Mm-hmm. I do think it's a good decision to do that. But before you decide to actually hire Kai and work with him in this process, you might want to say, hey, listen, let me try this out first, and at least see if I can get on one show. What are some of the steps a person would take before they decide to hire you and let you help them really roll this program out?
Great question. So, and we're asking, what are the steps they take to DIY their podcast tour, get their feet wet, and see what this system looks like?
Well, not necessarily. Let me ask that because I don't think I asked that correctly. So what are some key bullet points or steps they could take, number one, to identify the kind of podcast they would be on? And then once they identify, say, a handful of podcasts, how do they go about contacting those people? And then what are some of the things, as an example? I know you have 32 emails, and obviously you're not going to sit here and read your emails, but what might an email from a 30,000 foot view kind of sound like, look like, feel like that they would send to the guest or the host or the producer mm-hmm. of the show, so that somebody who listens to this, if they have half their brain tied behind their back, could take what you've given them. And I think I could say honestly that pretty much just about everybody who listens to the show, who are members of the Get Clients Now Nation, are really smart people. So the go-getters, the people who are going to take action, are going to be able to take that and just test it. Once they see, hey, this guy's right on, I'm going to hire him. This guy has totally nailed it. Now I want him to help me because he gave me information and I could see immediately this is going to work. Letting him help me would take me to the next level. So what are some of those steps from identifying the right kind of show to who do I contact and what should I say in that initial contact, things like that, just mm-hmm. from a 30,000 foot level? Obviously, we don't have time to go through your whole book.
So at a 30,000 foot level, the first step is identifying relevant podcasts. And that might be relevance in terms of market focus. Hey, I want to reach dentists. I'm not going to go pitch podcasts that reach artists or that are about, hey, how to cook a duck. They just aren't relevant. So the first step is figuring out who you want to reach and making sure it's a crispy, specific definition. Saying, hey, I want to reach small business owners, we're aiming a little bit too wide there. Hey, I want to reach, say, independent consultants or solopreneurs who are looking to get more leads. Oh, that's pretty crispy and specific. That's a good example of a targeted market to go after. So first step, get clarity on who you're trying to reach, who you want listening to these episodes. Second step, go out and search in Google or the iTunes podcast database or Stitcher or Spotify and say, okay, when I start searching for, consultant podcasts, freelancer podcasts, dentist podcasts, what comes up? Are there shows that feature guests on, every episode, every other episode with some regularity? If so, those are ones you want to flag as being a good match since they already have guests. If they don't have guests, you could always try pitching them. But in my experience, 99 out of 100 shows that don't have guests respond with a, hey, did you even listen to an episode? If we try to reach out to them and say, I'd love to guest on your show. So that's the initial step we take to identify. We'd refine it, build an initial list of podcasts. And when it comes to the outreach to them, the two things I'd call out, the first step is make sure your email is focused on the value to the host, to the podcast, and to their audience. You don't want to just say, hey, I'm a great speaker. I'd love to be on the show. End of message. There's no relevance. There's no reason why they'd be willing to open up their audience, the audience they've spent years cultivating, for somebody that's just showing up with like a 2-line email. So whenever I do any sort of outreach, I'm trying to frame it in terms of, this is why it's relevant to your listeners. This is how it'll make you look good to your listeners. This is how I'm going to show up and speak about this topic. And leading off in that way makes it a lot easier for the host or the producer or the person managing the guest flow for the podcast to say, hey, this person has their stuff together. It's clear that they know what's interesting to our audience or how to provide value to the audience. Let's, engage in a conversation here. Ask them for a couple more details, ask them about topics, and move that forward. So that's the main thing. Make sure your message is relevant to the host and to the audience. The second thing is follow-up wins. I've been doing outreach work since 2013, so just about 7 years now. And when it comes to stimulating conversations with other people, sending that email and trying to get their interest, the one thing that makes a huge difference is being willing to follow up. So whenever I do outreach, whenever a client or a customer buys the book Podcast Outreach and that 32 email template library, in it gives them the emails they could copy and customize to have an outreach sequence. So, hey, here's the first email we'll send. Here's the second email we'll send if we don't hear back. Here's the third email we'll send another week or two later if we haven't heard back at all. And that polite, persistent follow-up demonstrates your interest. You aren't just, spraying and praying, hey, I hope one of these 100 podcasts respond to me. Instead, you're saying, okay, for these relevant podcasts with an audience I could help who would be interested in this topic, I'm willing to take that additional action and follow up to help communicate the value I could provide just by showing up and saying, hey, here's an additional email. So it's a small optimization, but it makes such outsized performance improvements. And time again, whenever I consult on an outreach campaign or work with a client on their own podcast outreach campaign, they're forgetting to follow up. We get 2 or 3 follow-up emails in there and people start responding. It's almost like magic.
Yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with somebody who's successful and somebody who's got a successful show, whether it's the producer or the host, chances are they're going to miss if you send a single email. And there's nothing more obnoxious and rude and off-putting than somebody showing up with an open hand asking me to put something in it when I'm the one who's invested all the time, money, and effort to build the show. And the same goes for you. It's like somebody walking up on the street who doesn't want to work. Not that they couldn't work. Somebody who doesn't want to work and sticking their hand out saying, hey, you owe me, give me something because I'm a good person or because of this or because of my reputation. Who cares? Who are you? I mean, really, who cares? Or knowing the show's topic, the overall theme of the show and the audience and who that is and what's relevant to them. I mean, you nailed it because I don't know how many people have contacted me over the last year and a half that literally have no business. I would never, not that they're not good experts, their topic is so not relevant to what I'm doing, I wouldn't consider it for anything to have them on the show. And so it's just, it's insulting that they wouldn't take enough time and have enough respect for my time to look and see what the show's about before just spamming me with an email, and I'm sure they sent that same email to, like a bazillion other people, which is another reason why it's so off-putting. So let me ask you this. I know there are going to be people who are looking or listening and saying, hey, listen, this does sound like a good idea. Yes, I can see that Kai knows what he's doing. Yes, I can see that he's able to help people get on podcast shows, and this is definitely going to help their business. But what about pay-per-click? I'm doing this pay-per-click campaign. The guy's really not delivering for me, but I know it's going to come through eventually. Or I got this gal who's doing my content marketing. I know that's eventually going to pick up for me. Or I'm, maybe you're a dentist or whoever, a local brick and mortar business, and you're using Valpak, which can, in some instances, work. It doesn't really help with quality of people you bring in, but it does, in some instances, bring in a mass response. But having said that, why would somebody consider, either in lieu of or in addition to podcast guesting, when they're doing pay-per-click or they're doing content marketing or whatever they're doing, SEO, all those things? Where does this kind of fit into that puzzle?
Podcast outreach and podcast guesting is interesting because it's a little squishy in terms of where it fits into. It could both be top of funnel. Hey, we're reaching people. We're saying, go visit my site over here, and it's bringing new visitors in. It could be sort of middle of the funnel. Hey, we already have awareness in the marketplace. Let's better nurture these and get on podcasts so people who already know who we are say, oh, they're doing this interesting thing I didn't know yet. So it's a bit squishy in terms of how does it compare to, say, content or paid. Let me think here for a moment. In terms of how it compares to content or paid, I'll often see podcast tours slowly sidle into being content creation themselves, where, hey, we just appeared on 6 podcasts. Great. Let's make sure we're emailing those out to the list. Let's have them in our evergreen funnel. Let's have them up on our website. Let's have social, both paid and free, pointing to it. Let's have advertising pointing to these. So appearing on podcasts as a guest can help you both reach people who are interested in what you have to share and relevant to your market, and give you great content to share elsewhere within your marketing ecosystem, because have, say, half a dozen great 30-minute interviews featuring you as a subject matter expert. That type of material plugs very well into any sort of marketing campaign you're looking at.
Okay, and so it's not necessarily an either or. It could be, but at the same time, it could also be, as an example, when I say it could be an either or, maybe a business owner doesn't have the money to really invest in a campaign online that's actually going to, they don't have enough to invest to test and run and test and then eventually scale something that's going to work. So podcast guesting could be a great opportunity for them to generate some quick revenue, generate some quick wins, get some deal flow coming in, make some money, and then they can in turn reach out and start investing, taking the podcast content they get from their shows, investing that into content marketing with all the different ways. You just scratched the surface. I know there's so many different ways that you come at this in your programs, and you just tie it all together so nicely. But what are some of the ways that a person could prepare? So let's just assume for a moment that, John Smith, whoever is your client, and they say, hey, listen, I want to be on Ken Newhouse's Get Clients Now podcast show. And so you get a hold of me and we get it lined up. What are you going to tell them, kind of, again, from that 30,000 foot level? What would you tell them as far as preparation, what they need to do to prepare to make sure the experience is good for me so that it's going to reflect good on you and reflect well on them as well?
The first thing is listen to an episode or two of the show, just so you have a general idea of the flow. Reach out to the host and ask, hey, is there anything I should know? Any special details, any special segments that I could prepare for? And along with that, ask the host, okay, are these the main beats you're interested in? These are the main topics you want to pull from. In addition to those, reaching out to the host and asking, hey, do you do any pre-interviews with guests? I'd love to get on a quick 20-minute call, chat with you about the show, confirm my audio works, confirm the topics. So those are all top of mind opportunities to make sure it's a great experience for the listeners, the host, and for yourself. Another one that I'll often recommend to people who feel a bit of the butterflies in the stomach around recording a podcast episode is jump on Zoom with a friend. Say, hey, here are 4 questions or half a dozen questions. Ask them to me about what I'm doing, what I'm working on, just so you could get a little more experience about what it's like live to be asked these questions, think of an answer, flub an answer, and just move forward with it. So practicing really does help there. Reaching out to the host to get additional information, reaching out to see what the episodes are like. All of these stack together really, really nicely to make sure it's a powerful and positive experience.
Okay, and so earlier I mentioned the fact that you got the podcast outreach, the book, and then also the additional videos that come with that, which is a bit of an upsell, but certainly still you're not charging enough. That's my opinion. It's your business, but I mean, for something that's giving that much value, and I understand why you're doing it, it's certainly worth a lot more than you're charging for it, though. But what about the podcast tour? What is the podcast tour, and why would a business owner? I mean, why are so many people choosing this particular option with you versus just sticking with the podcast outreach book?
Great question. So the podcast tour offering I describe it as a done for you podcast tour, where client comes in, they say, hey, I want to appear on some podcasts and reach my market. And I say, great. What I do is handle it teeth to tail. All you really need to do, dear client, is show up, record the episode, and then say, hey, we recorded it. I handle identifying the podcasts, writing the outreach emails, coordinating with the client on the pitches and the talking points, handling the outreach, and once the client is booked and records, handling the post-episode follow-up. Hey, host, it was great to have person on. Any questions I could answer? Anybody else that you think would be a great fit? I'm always keeping my eyes open. So what I do is just provide this complete experience for clients where all they have to worry about is making sure they make it to the interview on time, and everything else is just done for them. So they're able to pick up the skills they need in terms of appearing on the podcast, having a great interview, and promoting the podcast, while I'm making sure they're supported with everything they need to get there.
So you're doing all the heavy lifting, and all they have to do is literally come in and just do what they do.
Yep.
On a call, and they're done, and it's on to next. So you're doing all the heavy lifting. And I know you've had really good success with that. And I know you've got a literal ton of testimonials. Something I've been doing for some of my guests is, actually, I've been doing it for all of my guests here recently. I've got a new program, a live training that's coming out in June. I put 2 videos up now where I took my old video testimonials. So it's a social proof selling, and the name of the live training is going to be Social Proof Profits. But what I want to do is I'm going to let you attend. And now I think I might let everybody attend for free just because of the coronavirus. I may just do the first training for free, the actual paid. I was going to charge $2,000 for it. And I don't have that many people in my trainings because of the fact that I want to give one-on-one. And it's a group setting, but still I want to give as much personalized attention as I can. But I took my old testimonial system, the video testimonial system, because social proof selling is like, that's why social proof literally lets you leverage the connections of your clients, customers, or patients so they can do the selling for you. A lot of people hate to sell, but what I want to do is, I'm going to obviously extend that to you. You can attend for free. What I think I'm going to make everybody else do is, and I have nothing to sell after that. It's not like an upsell or a way to, like you said, that one guy tried to work you in. I don't do that. And I'm not accepting clients right now. But what I want to do is, I want to let you attend that for free. But having said that, you've got so many different testimonials on your website. The only thing that I think that if I could give a suggestion with that many people, it would, and granted, you're probably not accepting a whole lot of new clients at this point because of the fact that you're doing so well. But the only thing I would suggest is maybe utilizing some video testimonials, but I want to extend that to you as well for free. I'm going to make everybody else, if I do give it away free, they're going to have to donate something to help out people who are suffering from coronavirus. And I don't care how much it is, just the act. Because if I just let them show up for free, I mean, you've invested your time with me, so I don't feel like I'm giving it to you free. I feel like it's the least I can do. You're providing so much value to our tribe. But in addition, so I just wanted to throw that out before I forget, because sometimes I forget stuff. It goes back to being hit by a dump truck and a head-on car accident. So, you talked about the brain earlier. I think you and I talked in our pre-call. I had massive brain injuries, and so it's weird. One of my flaws, I guess, or weaknesses, Superman had kryptonite. Mine is I could be in the middle of a great conversation and completely forget what I'm talking about. Right after my accident, people I'd known my whole life for like a year, I could tell you anything that I did with them my whole life, but I couldn't remember their name. Could not remember. And then 6 months I had diplopia, which is double vision. So that really messed me up. But I still, from time to time, will either totally forget what I'm talking about in the middle of it. Sometimes I've gone to a movie, which I don't do often. I'll completely forget the movie. My wife's like, we just saw that movie a month ago. I'm like, I've never seen that movie. I have no idea. And then something triggers and then I remember. So when that popped into my head, sorry, I kind of ran down a rabbit hole with that. But in addition to podcast guesting, and just getting people on the show, there's a lot more involved in this. So if you could take a couple minutes, let's talk about some of the other things that you're doing to help your clients. Because really there is a lot more to this. And this is, as I mentioned earlier at the outset of the show, let's talk about some of the things you're doing that really help set you apart and the benefit that you bring to your clients that just a podcast booking agency isn't going to be able to bring. What are some of those things? Let's just go ahead and run with it.
Of course, yeah. The one that immediately comes to mind is I'll help my guests with their topic pitches, or my clients with their topic pitches. So that'll often take the form of a 45 to a 60-minute call. And it might be something like this. We're on Zoom, it's a video chat. And I'm just saying, okay, like, tell me a bit about your expertise. What's something your target market struggles with? What's something they're looking to learn more about? Or what's like a tip or trick or a secret hack you could share them to help them say, oh, wow, I did not know you could do that. Wonderful. And so in a conversation, I'll pull out somewhere between, half a dozen or a dozen different topic ideas. I'll go off to the back cave, think on them for a bit, see, okay, which one of these line up? I'll take a look at a sample set of podcasts that my guest would like to appear on or think would be a good fit, and confirm, okay, if one of these topics was on that show, does it seem resonant? Does it seem a little dissonant? Does it seem like it's not a fit at all? And so I'll go through this refinement process and produce an output for the client in terms of, hey, here are the 3 or 4 topics that I recommend we start off with. We could always pull from the other ones, but these are the pointy tip of the spear. This is what we want to lead with. And I'll go ahead and move those into the outreach emails, start sending them, observe the feedback, and say to my client, hey, you know what? Topic 1, everybody wants topic 1. Topic 2, 3, and 4, nobody wants those topics. Let's find a couple more topics like topic 1 so we can diversify it. And you're not saying the exact same pitch on every show. So I'll think of it as sort of consulting on the full process of podcast tours. If my client is appearing on podcasts but saying, hey, I'm not liking the audio or I'm not feeling confident or comfortable, I'll often say, okay, great. Let's run through a role play exercise. We'll get on a call. I'll put on a persona as like a grouchy host with audio issues, or somebody who's just not letting them get a word in edgewise, common failure points that might come up in a podcast recording experience, and just use it as an opportunity to confront those areas where my client is feeling a little bit scared. What happens if my audio drops? What happens if we disconnect? I'll say, let's try it out. We'll get into a conversational flow, and then I'll just end the meeting. And the reason I approach it this way is going through the experience of, this is the thing I'm scared of. Oh, it happened, and we were able to, get back to it, retool, regroup, move forward with the interview, often confronts and overcomes that fear. And so I think of it large or big picture as I'm here to help my clients succeed with their podcast interviews. And that might take the shape or form of these common things I've touched on, or more one-off solutions, depending on the client's situation or their needs or what's coming up with them as resistance in this overall process.
Okay, and so let me just follow up with this question. You doing okay on time?
Yes.
Okay, so I got a question that just popped into my head, and I think it's a really important question. Obviously, when somebody goes through the podcast tour with you and you're helping them one-on-one, they're going to be very successful with it. And this, like I said, this thought just popped into my mind. I would think that a lot of these people don't have an email marketing system or sequences set up. And so I know from just doing my research and due diligence on you that one of the things that you're very well known for is being able to help people build these, the architecture, the framework of an email marketing system, an automated system, so that when they start getting all these calls and this traffic from the fact that you've helped them get on these podcasts, what would happen? I mean, as an example, if you were to get somebody on a podcast, but they don't have an email automated system to follow up, they're going to lose a lot of the potential business. So how important is it, first of all, to have that email system? And then kind of give us, again, a 30,000 view of what's involved with that. And obviously, I mean, this is what I do for a living, but as an example, you and I both know there's a lot involved with that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, setting up Infusionsoft, I mean, there's just a lot of moving parts. Most people don't have the time or the ability to do it because they're specializing in something else. But talk about that for a few minutes, because I think that's a necessary point that I don't want to overlook. I mean, if you've got all this deal flow coming in, the last thing you want to do is let it go to waste, like not following up. You've invested the time, money, and effort. You're getting all this exposure, all this traffic, and now you're losing it because you don't have a system in place. So how important is that, Kai?
Incredibly important. I'm so happy you brought that up because it would have slipped my mind as well. I think of it as sort of the last mile problem. If we don't have a way to capture the interest of the people who hear us on a podcast, well, how are they going to remember to check us out? They're most likely in their car or on a walk or cooking in the kitchen, and they won't say, hey, who was that guy I heard on Get Clients Now who was talking about podcasts? I don't know. And then it just sort of dies. So what I recommend to all of my clients and all customers who purchase podcast outreach is we need to set up a landing page, what I call a catcher's mitt, to catch those people coming at us from the podcast. We need to set up a small lead magnet, something of value we could offer for free in exchange for an email address. And we need to make sure we have some nurturing or some automation there just to give them a slow drip of other relevant content, maybe other podcasts my client has been on, maybe resources or talks they've given, or just any sort of content. So it's incredibly important. I advise all my clients, we want to head in this direction. Some clients say, hey, email just isn't my jam. I don't want to move forward with this. In those cases, I say, I would be doing you a disservice if we moved forward with this podcast tour and we didn't have a mechanism in place to capture people who are interested. So as part of the package, I'll either advise my client's team on, hey, this is what we need to set up. Here are a couple options. You got Infusionsoft, you've got MailChimp, what works for your budgets. Make sure they have this architecture in place, even if it's just the 100 level architecture and there's a ton left that they could be doing, and making sure it's a positive experience from first moment a listener hears them on an episode through what I think of as a contextual call to action. Hey, if you want to learn more about this, go to this URL and sign up for my free thing, through that first experience of opting into the list, receiving that first email. It's almost like there's an unbroken thread we want to preserve. Somebody connects with us in that episode. We want to make sure they make it all the way over to that sequence, but when they've opted in, so they're able to continue in this relationship with us. Incredibly important as a part of the overall tour.
Absolutely. I mean, the last thing, could you imagine going through all this process in the podcast tour, generating all these calls? You're getting Kai's got it now set up. So you're on all these different shows. You're getting tons and tons of people trying to, they're hitting your website and boom, there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. They get a phone call. Okay, well, yeah, our phone number's on our website. Well, okay, so 10 or 20% of the people actually call you. What about all the other people who are conditioned to follow up and find out more information through email, and they're conditioned to want to download free information, and they're conditioned to giving their email address, and they're conditioned to giving permission to receiving not spam, but just, value in the form of a response series of emails from you. And so to overlook all those people and all that potential revenue and income is absolutely, that would be a huge mistake. So let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we're going to talk about how people can find out about more about you, your website, things you do. And then I'm going to include, you've given me a special link. I'm going to include that in the show notes, but also I want you to talk just for a few minutes after you answer this last question. Tell us more about your website and some of the things that you're, whatever you want to talk about, you can, give us your 2 or 3 minute pitch. Because I definitely want to hear as well. But what's the one question today, Kai, that I should have asked you on the interview that I didn't?
Ooh, that's a really, really good one. How podcast tours can connect to other marketing plays. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people who say, I want to, keynote conferences or be invited to speak at conferences or just grow my overall authority in an industry. How can I best use a podcast tour to do that? And oftentimes it comes from stacking social proof or just experience. I'll often coach clients on, okay, you want to speak at this conference? That's wonderful. Are there any podcasts that previous attendees have spoken on? Are there any podcasts run by organizers from the conference? Are there any other media plays we could wrap into this podcast campaign? So I'll often see the podcast tour itself as an element to achieve an overall larger goal. In the past, this approach has helped clients both build stronger relationships with organizers at conferences and get invited to speak, or build relationships with other speakers at the event. And so when they show up at the event, they're able to say, oh, hey, I interviewed on my podcast. Super excited to, see you give this presentation live. So a podcast tour can be a wonderful mechanism to build relationships overall, even if the outcome we're aiming for isn't get more people on the list or get immediate sales. It's a powerful way to build your authority and renown within an industry.
Sweet. Okay, so how can we find out more about, what's your website URL, things like that? And again, you've got a special link, a special opportunity for all the listeners and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation. I'm going to include that in the show notes. But if they're just listening and they're driving and they want to punch it in on their phone, run with that one.
Perfect. So the most valuable spot for a listener to check out, getonpodcasts.com. It's a free short email course I have on how to get on podcasts. It does what it says on the tin. This is me giving you relevant information similar to this interview, but oftentimes a little level deeper or two about how to get started with this process yourself. The second resource I'd call out, my main site, kaidavis.com, KAIDAVIS.com. The homepage advertises something I'm very proud of. I write a daily letter, absolutely free, on marketing yourself as a solo professional or an indie consultant. Readers are constantly writing in and saying, yo, I can't believe you're giving away this much value for free. I wish this was hype. They actually write in and say that. And it really is one of the things I'm most proud of creating and writing each day. And I always aim to make sure it is valuable for a subscriber or for a reader.
Yeah, it's really good content. And guys, I will say this. I originally found Kai doing my research, and we had a few issues that came up, an emergency that came up, and Kai was originally going to be on the show some time ago, and then I dropped the ball initially. So he's actually appearing on the show much later than I had originally wanted, but I'm thankful that he's here. But I will say this, before I ever talked to him, I signed up for his email course, the one he just talked about. Tell us the URL for that again.
Getonpodcasts.com.
Yeah, I signed up for that just to see, because oftentimes, you hear things about people, and I don't know Kai personally, but I just know people who know him. I know people that have worked with him, and they're getting great results. But I wanted to see for myself the kind of content that he was going to give away free, because oftentimes you hear people say, download my free lead magnet or sign up for this free email course, and it's garbage. But I got to say, you should be charging for this stuff, because obviously on a podcast, we can't go into that kind of detail, but the stuff you're giving away on this email course that's like a course that somebody would pay for. And so thanks for offering that to the tribe. I really appreciate that. And I know they will as well. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Anything you want to say before we run?
One other thing, if folks are interested in checking out the book, Podcast Outreach, you could check it out at podcastoutreach.com and purchase your copy there. And yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This has been a great experience.
All right, man. We'll be in touch.
Talk to you later.
Thank you, brother. Thanks.
Our objective with this podcast is to help you and your business stand out in the marketplace by crystallizing your messaging, marketing, and communications. On behalf of the whole Ken Newhouse team, thanks for listening.